Alright, cutting these little chunks off of here, off of this plastic factory gauge piece was really the best way of going about this. Now up here, I mentioned in the previous video that, to cut it, leave the plastic going all the way across. I completely spaced out and I didn't even do it that way on mine. If you're going to try this, I'd recommend you leave the little plastic piece that goes all the way across. It's not really an issue. I mean, it flops a little bit, but I'm really not worried about it. But just for a little bit of extra strength, leave the plastic that would go between these two pieces. This one over here just kind of going to have to be on its own. So we got this done. Let me mount up the gauge bezel, show you how it looks, and then we'll move on. Alright, so we got the gauge nicely fitted to the dash. So this part of the project is pretty much finished. I'll come in here. Hopefully you can see that with a little bit of pressure you can get them to line up. But this one I got a screw in there, lines up real well, and this one down here also lines up pretty well too. So no issues there. And I don't know if you can see. Let me see if I can get the camera down there. You can see the holes there for the selector and the volume knob on the radio line up with the bezel real nice. So we're good to go here. So let's move on to the next part of the project, which is going to be actually building a small little wiring harness on this gauge panel, and I'm actually going to use little plugs to connect the little short wiring harness from the gauge bezel to the actual wiring harness of the truck. So like I said, the next step that we're going to tackle in this project is we're actually going to build a wiring harness off of the back of the gauge bezel there. Now I've got an aftermarket wiring harness installed here in my truck. I'll kind of zoom in here. You can see this wire's labeled coil. All these wires are individually labeled. You see there's the new fuse block, and I have 30 some odd videos in a series of actually how I wired up this truck, and you can see some of the instructions. It's a Speedway kind of universal wiring harness. This little section of the instructions is for wiring the ignition switch, but another page of the instructions is wiring up all the gauges. And like I said, all these individual wires are labeled. Hopefully you can see if that'll zoom. Gas gauge, there's the coil wire again, high beam indicator. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut probably in this area right here. That'll still leave me plenty of lead here to plug these wires into a connector. I'll cut them here, utilize the remaining strands to build the wiring harness on the back, and then I'll get a couple of large plugs that the gauges will actually just snap in right there, and you won't have to fumble with little individual wires. So let's get started working on that.